on these webinars on a regular basis since March last year, because we think that at Kieser Australia, we've got some incredibly knowledgeable, talented exercise scientists, physios, and exercise physiologists. And hopefully some of you have attended these webinars before and you found our information useful. So tonight, I really like the title of Wil's presentation. Wil's going to talk about rebuilding a stronger Australia again, because we've done it once. It feels like we've done it a couple of times post-lockdown, doesn't it, Wil? But there are some really important messages that you need to be thinking about. We know that January and February are really big times for people to start exercise programs anyway. So this will be an opportunity for Wil to teach you, based on his exercise science experience and exercise science knowledge, what's the safe and most productive way to do it. To try and give Wil a little bit of a hand, for those of you who attended these webinars before, we often start them off with a poll. So I'm just going to pop a poll up on the screen. So hopefully everybody can see that now. We try and just keep this poll open for 60 or 90 seconds. And if you can all take a second to tick through the I think I've put 4 questions in. Yeah, I just put 4 questions in on the poll. So if you can take the time just to have a look at that, pop in your answers, then it might help Wil get a little bit more information throughout the presentation. So if you have a question, while everybody's doing that poll, if you have a question throughout Wil's presentation, there's a Q&A function down the bottom of the screen. And I ask that you pop your question in there and I'll take a look at that. And when there's an opportune time, I'll jump in and ask Wil for a question. So if you ask a question that I think Wil's covering a little bit later, I might hold back a little bit, but trust me, we'll do everything we can to get as many questions as possible. We're going to keep this poll open for another 30 seconds. Wil, I don't know, can you see the results live, Wil, or is that just me as host?
I'm not seeing that at the moment.
Okay, well, I can tell you that 65% of people have returned to training. So 37% of people haven't yet. There's a bit of a mix on whether people are planning on doing more or less exercise whether they did more or less exercise in 2020 than planned. So about 44% of people did more than planned. And certainly health is going to be a bigger priority in 2021 than it was previously. So there's 2 minutes worth of the poll. I'm going to end it and I'll just share the results with everybody. So 65% of people said that health was going to be a bigger priority this year. And certainly health and general strength would be the 2 biggest reasons that people are choosing to exercise. So really important, really interesting insights. Not many people here training for aesthetics. About 1/3 of people doing exercise for weight loss. So gives you some idea, Wil, of why people are listening in, not only because of the beautiful picture that we sent out and because all of your clients really like you, but also some people want to know a bit about health and pain management and a few other things. So I'm going to stop sharing that now. And I'm also going to turn off my video and my microphone, Wil, to stop being a distraction. And I'm going to hand over to you. Thank you very much for your time and good luck.
Beautiful. Thank you. Thanks, Tim. Couldn't believe they actually asked me to speak up at one of these webinars, because I do a lot of that on my day-to-day. My clients who are in the room can attest to that. But yeah, thanks for coming. So as Tim said, I'm going to be discussing a few little things here about rebuilding a stronger Australia again. So if you don't know me, I'm the principal exercise scientist here in the Malvern Clinic. I've been here with us for a few years now, so I'm excited to present my knowledge to you guys. So first of all, as Tim sort of said before, as people were trickling through, Happy New Year. Hope you guys had a great break, as much as you could amongst the COVID times. Obviously well aware, lots of plans have changed. Hopefully If you did, you sort of saw family and friends over this period of time. If you're down at the beach, hope you enjoyed that. I'm very jealous. Yeah, I'll be taking my leave very soon, as Tim just said. So Great Ocean Roadway, if you're out that way, I might bump into you. But here's what to sort of expect for the rest of this webinar today is a few cheeky reminders on how to use the app, how to book in for an independent session, go through some of the Kieser principles, just refreshing that. A lot of my clients get frustrated when I keep reminding them about these core principles that we work by, but it's for a reason. It's all evidence-based. We'll touch on that later. The science of detraining and retraining. So there's a few case studies that I'd love to present and a few other ones if I had more time. Unfortunately, I don't, but I'll explain sort of the takeaways there. And I guess my sort of 5 tips that I would suggest to get back to training and how to sort of attack this the best way possible. And at the end, I'll open it up to a Q&A. But obviously, feel free to ask questions throughout. We've got Tim sort of moderating. He'll pull me up if anything. So first of all, we have the app. If you don't know already, we have fully transitioned to the app. If you don't have it, it's very straightforward, to be honest, to sort of set it up. So I won't spend too much on this, but I'll quickly go over it anyway. So the App Store or the Play Store on your Android phone or your iPhone or whatever it is, just search up Kieser Connect, I before E, okay? So not Kaiser, Kieser. So if you're in trouble, go to your local clinic, call up national support and they'll help you out. It's pretty straightforward though. Even better yet, if you have someone that's tech savvy, then get them involved and it should be pretty straightforward from that point of view. You will need to register, but hopefully we all know how to do that. We also need a booking for an independent session. So this is our way of monitoring and contact tracing and monitoring and limiting numbers within the center just to make it a sort of comfortable experience for everyone as they return back to training and things like that. So if you don't know how to do that, go to this website that I've linked just here. So connect.kieser.com.au. You'll need that same login that you use for the app to log in and select your time and day. Pretty straightforward. You can book well in advance, I think 6 weeks advance. But again, if you get stuck, give us a call. We're here to help.
Will, I just need to jump in quickly. We've had a question from Doug. Will the need to pre-book independent training sessions change in the near future? The answer is hopefully, Doug. We understand that it's a barrier for people to be coming back. And as soon as we feel comfortable with the whole situation, then we will make that change. But even when we do, I think everybody will understand that we do it with the caveat that we might need to bring it back at some point. People have been really comfortable in coming back to Kieser across all 3 states in which we operate because we've been really conservative in the numbers of people that we have in our clinic and all of our hygiene measures. So because people appreciate that so much, we will keep it for now. But as soon as we can, and certainly that point is approaching closer and closer, we will look to allow you to come in whenever you like again. So thanks for the question, Doug, and apologies I had to jump in so quickly.
No, you're right. Had the same question, to be honest. No, so that's good. I think another thing as well with book independent session, I actually think it makes it easier to plan your day out, which I'll discuss later on in the piece here, but we'll move on from this. Okay, so as I said before, we're going to refresh some of the Kieser principles. Hopefully, by now, we're well aware that the tempo or the cadence that we're working at is that 4-2-4-2. Now, once upon a time, it was actually 4-2-4, and there was none of that 2-second hold. And a client of mine actually came up to me, dear Joan, came up to me and said, Will, why did you guys actually add that extra 2-second hold? And why do you actually do it that slow? So hopefully we do all know this, but I'm just going to quickly explain it again. So that 4 seconds is when you're pushing out, so that concentric movement. So when you're pushing out, reducing that gravity, hold for 2 seconds at a certain end range, come back for 4 seconds, and then hold again for 2. So obviously that slower movement allows for the intensity of that exercise to be a little bit harsher, like more difficult. Also allows you to have a bit of a reduced load, so less load going to the joints, and to optimally fatigue that muscle and keep it under tension, because we know tension is the main driving factor in what we call muscle hypertrophy, so increasing muscle size and therefore strength. So what that extra 2-second hold does at the end is reduces another part of it. So I guess momentum. So if you think of what we call the shorten and stretch cycle or the stretch reflex, if I were to hold a rubber band out and hold it taut and let go, it's going to spring straight back out. So if you think of your muscles in a similar fashion, your tendons especially, it's going to help you bounce out of that position. Obviously, it's going to make the exercise easier. And unfortunately, we don't want that, because you want to almost put your body in a disadvantaged position so you can focus on whatever exercise and muscles you want to. So that's the first thing, 4-2-4-2, don't forget it. The next thing is 90 to 120 seconds is our time under load. Now, why do we do this? Our research suggests that if you reach fatigue, that is, again, another mechanism to get that strength hypertrophy, the muscle hypertrophy, and therefore strength. Now, minimum dosage for that, I guess, would be reach fatigue between 90 seconds and 120 seconds. If you go longer than the 2 minutes, there's no more added benefit for doing that. So it's sort of like a lost area here. As a result, you would know that we suggest our clients to increase their weight accordingly. So they can eventually fatigue between 90 to 120 seconds. That's something to keep in mind again as we continue through this webinar there, but that's just the main sort of principle. The next thing here is to train 1 to 2 sessions per week and allow adequate recovery between your sessions. So think of 48 to 72 hours between your training times, whatever sort of works for you. And as always, my clients again can echo this. I love my technique and it will and always be the priority. So there's no point doing an exercise if you're not going to recruit the right muscle groups, because yes, you can maybe move the weight stack from A to B. If you're not using the right muscle groups, then what's the point? So these are the principal refreshers here. I'll sort of touch base as we sort of move in and out this webinar here, and it all makes sense further down the track, hopefully. But hopefully this is not brand new. Okay, so sort of the fun part here, the science of detraining and retraining. So as I go through the next few slides here, some questions I want you guys to think about is, what is my training history? So how long have I trained for in the past? How consistent have I been with my training? Have I done any exercise over COVID? What type of exercise have I done over COVID? What training intensity have I trained to? How old am I? Have I experienced any pain in the past while I was training? So these are all these questions I want you to just think about at the back of your head as I go through the next few slides, because they'll all play a factor in your return to training, okay? Okay, so the first sort of slide here is just looking at a short break. If I just look at this graph here, it's looking at what we call periodization. So in terms of like an athlete setting, their coach, their strength and conditioning coach will look at dividing up their what we call macro cycle, so over the year, into mesocycles, so little 4-week blocks of exercises. And what they'll do is they'll slowly load the progression in terms of the weight, and then in the 5th week, do a deload. So where they participate in lower intensity or in some cases do no exercise at all. They'll follow this trend, as you can see in this graph here. That's what's happened here. So the loads increased in the 5th week, in the 9th week, they've tapered back and they've built up. Now, why this is relevant is because that's in an athletic, I guess, population there. But if you think about taking a short break in this study, what they looked at 14 men who are untrained, and they basically did 6 weeks of training and then took 3 weeks of rest. That's really relevant, especially if you've had a bit of a holiday, you've gone down to Sorrento, gone to your beach house and had a good time, got your tan on, which I'm trying to work on myself. But what it's shown us is that in this study, basically, there was no difference in strength training or cross-sectional area. So there wasn't a dip at all. They were able to sort of maintain their strength level, similar to what an athlete would do normally when they are training for an event or whatever it is. So I guess you can sort of say you are an athlete to an extent if you did take a holiday. So the takeaway for this little study here in 2013 is that even if you did take a 1, 2, 3 week break or a holiday, you're not going to be that much of a sort of decrease in strength. And they did the exact or similar study in 2015 with women. So this applies to everyone in this webinar. The next thing is, what if I took it all the way to the extreme? What if you literally lay in bed for 12 weeks, just chilled out for a little bit, literally did that? So this study here is really, really fascinating. Kramer in 2017. The whole purpose of this this study here was to look at space. So if you wanted to, obviously there's no gravity in space. So if you want to have a 12-week snooze, maybe become an astronaut. But what they were looking at here was the effect of if someone was literally in bed rest for 12 weeks. So you can see this diagram here. The poor sort of test subject here is literally lying flat. And they have a 6 degrees of head tilt, so looking down ever so slightly. And then they split this study up into 2 different groups, into a jump group, into a control group. The control group literally did nothing. for 24 hours a day. They would have, I think, 1 to 2 physio sessions a week just so they could move them a little bit. But otherwise, they did nothing. Obviously, they would eat as well. You've also got the jump group who did literally 3 minutes of exercise around sort of 5 or 6 days a week in that. So only 3 minutes of exercise where they did some counter movement jumps and some hops. So just 3 minutes, not a lot. And what I'll show you next are the results. Shouldn't be a surprise to anyone here, but you look at that control group who did literally absolutely nothing. Their bone density in their lower limbs decreased by 4.5%. That's quite a lot in 12 weeks' time. Now, the reason why that's quite important to sort of identify there is that obviously your bone mineral density is really important because it is an indicator of your risk of getting a fracture. So that's really important to look at there. Another thing, obviously, if we look at the control group and the results on your screen here, everything's just decreased by quite a bit. Your knee extension, so your quad muscles, I can't really show, I'm not flexible enough to show my quads here, but the front of your thighs, that strength has decreased by 41%. Your knee flexors, so your hamstrings at the back of your thighs, decreased by 16%. Your plantar flexors have decreased by 41%. Your dorsiflexors by 7%, and your VO2, so your aerobic capacity, 29%, and your peak power output by 29%. Now, you look at this jump group. I'll remind you, only did 3 minutes of hopping and jumping, basically, a day, 3 minutes. Their bone density was able to remain the same, pretty much. That's huge. Knee extension only dropped by, as you can see on your screen, 3%. I won't go through it all because you can see it on your screen there. But you can see that the 3 minutes of exercise there was able to protect and defend the gains as much as possible. Another thing I want to sort of highlight here is that your extensor muscles, so your knee extension, so your quads, your plantar flexors here, they are what we call your, I guess, anti-gravity muscles, your postural muscles. They're the one that keep you upright. They're the one that keep you in that position. And as we get older, those muscles are the ones that are easier to reduce in strength, I guess. And that's how you get into these sort of rounded postures. So it's important to note that if we haven't done much exercise over this period of time, that's something to recognize there. But yeah, you can see obviously how important obviously a bit of exercise is, and that's just on one extreme. So the reason why I guess this is also important is because you can sort of apply this if anyone's coming out of any operations or surgery where you are in bed rest for a few days, obviously not for 12 weeks, not this extreme, hopefully, no one's been in bed rest for 12 weeks, hopefully, you'll start to experience some of these effects. So that's something to think about as well. Now, I'll go to more of a, I guess, a relevant situation here. So what if I trained for 12 weeks, then stopped for 12 weeks, and then came back in again for 12 weeks? So in 2020, we did 12 weeks, literally what I just said there. So 12 weeks training, 12 weeks detraining, 12 weeks of retraining. 40 men aged over 58, average of 65. And what they saw was that in the first 12 weeks, you can see on the training on this graph here, their strength had increased by 36%. So the measurement of that they used here was that leg press, what we call a 1 rep max. So how heavy can you go for 1 repetition pushing out? So your maximum 1 rep. And they saw that over that first 12 weeks, as you would expect, hopefully, a 36% increase in strength. Now, over the next 12 weeks, where they were doing where they were detraining, so they weren't training at all, they experienced a 14% drop. So obviously, if you do the math there, 36 minus 14, you're still up a little bit to an extent. Now, if you look at the graph as well, in the retraining component, if you line up where the B matches the end of that 12-week block, you can see that the strength is straight back up almost straight away to an extent. And then they further build upon that strength that they've built. So they've retrained an extra 24%. Now, if you look at here, the takeaway for this sort of study here is that roughly it'll be about a 6 to 8 week time frame before you can get back to where you expect it to be. And then you got to take into account those questions I asked earlier that may sort of move the needle either one way or the other way. Okay, so I'll give you a few take-home messages from these studies, because there are other ones I could go for days, but those are the ones that sort of stood out for me because it gave you the little break, the extreme, and probably what most of us are experiencing. So take-home messages, not to overly repeat myself here, but 3 weeks of detraining will have a minimal effect on your strength over the long term, which is happy days there. Bed rest will affect strength of your lower limbs most, strength of your extensors most, and then your body composition and your cardiovascular fitness. All right. Look to take about 6 to 8 weeks to regain your strength. Your strength will be regained before your muscles and connective tissues actually return to their trained state. This is something I'll touch on later as well. As I asked before, what intensity have you been trained to? So the harder you have trained in the past, the more you will gain and the longer you will defend your gains for. So you saw that they did those 3 minutes of high intensity jumps and it defended a lot of their gains. Yes, it still decreased, but it was defended. There's a shorter road back to where they'll be. The older you are, unfortunately, I'm experiencing this myself at an old age of 25, the more you will gain, the more strength you will have lost. Okay. So perfect example, I returned back to futsal on Monday night and I sprained my ankle because I did no warm up, did nothing. I thought I was a hero. I went straight into it. No, came back and saw Tim, flew to Sydney and saw Tim to fix my ankle up. Another thing is pain is a significant moderator of strength. If you have had pain in the past, you will lose some more strength and it will recover more slow. So these are the take-home messages from what I want to tell you here. The next few slides here, I guess, oh, sorry, that face is a shock to me just seeing that there, are my 5 tips to get you back into training. Okay, so make a plan, set goals, back to basics, common mistakes, and just accept that life happens. So I'll go to the next slide here. So the first things first, make a plan. So everything works better with the plan. Invest in a diary or whatever. A lot of people are going back to paper diaries now. I'm still in the high-tech age, so I use my phone for everything. But everything works better with the plan. You're going to be less stressed, and research suggests you just stick to things better. So before you delve deep and enthusiastically start, a 10-kilometer run or whatever, and spend hundreds of dollars of new sporting equipment, which I stupidly just did for the snow season, even though I haven't been for over a year. I'm that excited to get back to it. Make sure you actually sit down and actually make exercise your plan. So we all know the sort of KISS rules, keep it simple, stupid. So it's going to tie back into some of the Kieser principles here. Do 2 strength training sessions per week, not on consecutive days. So give yourself that recovery. On your off days, do something you enjoy from a physical activity point of view. Go for a walk, go for a run, play tennis, golf, swim, ride your bike, whatever it is, do that. And obviously have 1 rest day per week. Now, this is just an example. You can map it out whatever way you want to. So for me, my little plan is Kieser on Tuesday and Friday because I finish early on those days and I can knock it out of the park because I'm nice and fresh during the week. Okay, and then introduce your other things. So for me, futsal on a Monday, I enjoy that. That's my sort of moderate activity on my off days. My Sunday, I'm having a complete rest day. So whatever it is for you, might be a good idea after this little webinar here is to get out a pen and paper and actually map out how you want your training to look when you return.
Well, I just wanted to pop up to let you know that I haven't gone anywhere, that I'm still here, haven't left and gone to the pub or anything. But we do also have a couple of questions. The 1 rest day, are we talking literally no exercise, including no walks? That was a question from Philip Collins.
What's a good one? Not necessarily. It depends on you. I wouldn't. It depends how much walking you're actually doing your off days as well. If it's a sort of a low intensity type, if you normally go a 2-hour walk, then you could still go on a walk for half an hour. Doesn't matter that much. It's more so the point here is more so making a plan and seeing what fits in for you. If that answers anything.
Yeah, and I think the other thing to cover there, Phil, is on that rest day, you're trying to have a rest from exercise, and perhaps a better description of it might be a rest from fatigue. So if you go for a walk and you normally walk really fast, you might, and you get a little bit tired at the end, maybe a bit short of breath or your heart rate goes up. You can probably still go for a walk, but you don't want to have any additional fatigue on that day because that day is designed to allow you to recover. So if you throw fatigue on top of it on your rest day, it kind of defeats the purpose. So, still move around. You don't have to be an astronaut and lie horizontal on that day, but just don't throw yourself additional fatigue. Well, the second question that we had was from Sasha, who said the 150 minutes on off days, is that per day that I have to do 150 minutes of exercise, or is that for the whole week that I need to do 150?
That'll be spread out thankfully that'd be a big effort if you could do that every single day. If you can find that time. Sorry, I may have worded that poorly, but yeah, spread it out over that week.
Yeah, and those two things are the Australia's physical activity guidelines. Those two things together, aren't they, Will? The 2 strength sessions a week and 150 minutes of moderate activity. The government's been recommending it for 20 years. Australia hasn't been very good at following the recommendations, but the government has been recommending it. It's a great plan for health. If you know anyone who's following that and has been following that for years, then odds are they're probably in the healthier group of your friends and colleagues. So thanks for that, Will. Those were the 2 questions that we had. Keep asking questions, everybody. Q&A function's just down the bottom. Will loves a question. The harder they are, the better, the more he enjoys them. So keep shooting.
I was going to say, as long as the questions aren't about what I'm doing on the weekend and my dating life, we're good to go. Relevant to the webinar, please. So the second thing is set goals. So we all know that we love SMART goals here at Kieser. So SMART goal, if you don't know it, it's a goal that is specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and time-bound. So a bit of a mouthful there. But we know that setting goals, you're going to be more likely to achieve them if you actually set them and write them down. Research suggests that. That's why we do it, because we are very evidence-based here. That's why we always set goals with our clients when they first come in, and constantly with their reviews and check sessions. That's why we have these strength tests to begin with. Now, we want to set short-term goals and long-term goals. Why both? Quite simply, short-term, it's important that it's so that we build slowly and don't overtrain and don't get so overexcited that we just push the bounds, just push the weights and do whatever, make our common mistakes, which I'll touch on in just a second. So a little short-term goal could be simply, like I said before, in that study that we saw, take 6 to 8 weeks to get back to where you were. Set that little goal out, write it out. You might not get there, you might fall a little bit short, but that's fine. You're still going to be progressing. You're still setting that goal to work towards. Long-term goals, so we continue to improve and don't just sort of like get complacent and don't just plateau. So we continue to build. So obviously both of these goals work together to keep you training sort of effectively and safely. So long-term goals could literally to be, I'm not really a golfer, I know, improve your handicap or whatever it is. Have that down the track and have these little short 6 to 8 week goals in between. Now with everything I'm saying here, I'll continue to talk obviously, but don't go this journey alone. Like, we have amazing, beautiful staff here at Kieser that are always willing to and want to help you guys to set these goals if you're struggling with any of that. So don't be afraid to ask when we come in for your sessions. Let's sit down. Let's have this chat. Let's make this plan. Let's set these goals. All right. And keep it simple. I'm going to go to the next slide now. Again, back to basics. So technique. I'm called Technique King for a reason here at Malvern. All right. So what we like to do here is obviously back to basics, to reduce the weights. By how much, you asked on the screen? So 2 to 4 weeks, about 10 to 20%, you had that time off. So even though the study did say earlier, there'll be minimal changes in your strength after 1 or 3 week break, I still suggest about 10 to 20% drop. And I'll explain why in just a second. 4 to 8 weeks, about 20 to 40%, and 8 weeks plus, the same sort of time frame, maybe more on the 40%, but I'll suggest booking in for review, either with, your exercise scientist, your exercise physiologist or physio, okay? But the reason why you want to sort of reduce the weights is because it also allows you to get that technique better. So what I like to call greasing the groove, going through the motion, feeling where and what should be working. Now, what actually happens is when you sort of return to training or you start something new, you might be really bad at it in a way, and you'll notice you just rapidly increase straight away. What's actually happening there is from the brain point of view. So neuromuscular adaptations are occurring first. So you become more efficient with the movement. Your brain's learning how to perform X, Y, Z exercises. And what comes later is then the physiological adaptations. That's where you get that muscle hypertrophy that I mentioned before. So the increase in muscle size and then therefore strength to support you to do whatever you want. Okay, so the question that I get asked a lot here is why? Like, why reduce the weights? I guess from an ego point of view, I've done this same mistake myself. Why not keep the weight the same and do less time? So we know that what I said before with the Kieser principles, if the most optimal time under load is 90 to 120 seconds, you haven't trained for, let's say, more than 4 8 weeks, then obviously it's going to be harder for you to perform that same weight. So what's going to happen is a few things here. Your techniques then go out the window. So you're not going to feel where you should be feeling, not recruiting the right muscle groups. That actually defeats the purpose of the exercise. And then you're not going to reach the desired time under load. So you're probably not going to reach that 90 seconds. You might only do a minute. And therefore, that's not enough time from an evidence point of view to elicit those strength adaptations, to elicit that muscle hypertrophy. And therefore, you're actually not going to progress anything. So if anything, you're pulling yourself back. And don't get me wrong, like, you might feel like this is great, this is a little bit too easy. That's because you're learning the movement you already know and you're getting better at it again. But those connective tissues, as I said before, those tendons, ligaments, muscles aren't ready. They take weeks for them to build back up. Whereas your brain's like, yep, mate, I'm ready to go. So that's the trap that people do fall into. Another thing as well is what we call a novelty stimulus. So, or novel stimulus rather, or novel bout of exercise. So the best example I like to give people, obviously, hopefully people know I love the snow at this point in time. When I go back to the first day on the snow, my legs are going to be cooked. I know for sure. Even though I can do as much training as I can here, it's a different stimulus for me. And so what's happening when you return from training, because you haven't done it for a little bit of time, yes, you've done it in the past, you haven't done it for a lot of time, you're going to still get that novel stimulus effect. So you're going to get that DOMS effect, so delayed onset muscle soreness. It also means you're going to get a bit of that accumulative fatigue. So if you keep that weight up and don't drop it, that's going to build from session to session. And eventually, that's where you fall into these common mistakes that I see.
Well, before you tick on to common mistakes, if you can go back one slide for me. Firstly, I completely agree. I'm looking forward to getting back to the snow. I missed all of my snow season as well. I think what you gave was a really elegant description of why people feel really good in the first couple of sessions. And from my point of view as a physiotherapist, I just wanted to reinforce that. And because sometimes what you can do and what you should do, they're poles apart. Your body is really, really good at remembering movements and it responds really quickly, but it doesn't necessarily mean that you should do it. And you have to trust me and you have to trust Will and our expertise to know that, you know, the benefit that you get out of pushing in those first couple of weeks, it's not going to make any difference by the time you get to the 6-week mark. And all it does is increase your risk. We had a really good question, Will, from Ingrid, who said, if someone has had a shoulder injury, a tendon tear, and comes back to training the upper body, how much should they reduce the weight? So I don't know the exact details of Ingrid's injury, but let's assume that she was going through a rehab, maybe kind of hadn't got the 100% rehab done and then needed to take a break because she needed to live her own life and go on holidays and things like that. And so she's had 4 weeks holiday and she's come back, but she was in a rehab phase as opposed to like a normal active training phase. How do you think that would apply to these weight reductions?
I'd suggest more of a conservative approach always, at least a 40% drop off in weight, just to go through the like there's nothing wrong to almost just go through the motion for the first couple of exercises, see how your body responds from these sessions, and then you can make the judgment call from there whether to slowly increase. Just see the response first, but conservative approach, like as Tim just said, you know, when you get to that 6 to 8 week mark, it's going to be no difference if you just went crazy and you had a flare up. So pull it right back, 40% at least. Obviously, suggest probably book in for a review to actually discuss that in detail. But yeah, pull it right back and see how you recover. Because you might actually feel good during the session, but just see how you feel the next couple of days after it.
Yeah, hopefully if Ingrid's in the middle of rehab, she's coming back to see a physio at some stage this week. I think that listening to your body is an important one. And with tendon injuries in particular, your body won't tell you at the time. It will feel pretty good at the time. It might be a day later or 2 days later that you'll get a little bit of feedback, but it's also cumulative. So you're less likely to notice it in the first session. You're more likely to notice it after the second and the third. So that's why we're such big advocates of this conservative response, or conservative approach rather, to just take it easy and try and get what information that we can, because your body might be a bit silent on giving us some feedback early on. Will, there was also a a question from Laurie, who said, are there any Motown or Dave Campbell swing music that is to the correct 4-2-4-2 beat? I want to make a Spotify list. And Laurie, unfortunately, I don't know. Will, what's your expertise on Dave Campbell? I've run into him a couple of times. He's a very nice guy, Dave Campbell, but I don't know of any of his music that's specifically to the 4-2-4-2 beat.
I've never heard of these guys, so I need to do a bit of homework there.
Yeah,
I don't know, I just lost the crowd there, but I haven't heard of any of those musicians at all.
Dave Campbell, Jimmy Barnes' son, mate. I better let you get to the next.
That's actually pretty embarrassing by me, but yeah, I'll have to look into that. That's a great idea, though.
It is good. It is a very good idea. I've got one more question. Sorry, I almost missed out on Christine's. Will, and I might have. This is probably one slide back. How do we achieve aerobic fitness when we don't have much time? We know that time is the biggest restriction for people exercising at a younger age, and in the second biggest restriction of people exercising once they're older than 55. So what suggestions do you have for increasing aerobic fitness when time is a constraint? Will?
Oh, that's a ripper.
While you're thinking, Will, I've got two ideas. The first is that there's some really good evidence that strength training, high intensity strength training, has huge aerobic benefits. There's a couple of studies that show you can get improvements in your VO2 max just by completing strength training. The caveat to that is that you do need to work quite hard. You need to have a high intensity. And so aside from strength training, if you've got limited time, you can do interval type training aerobically. So I'm certainly not suggesting, Christine, that you go out and run tomorrow, because I don't know your history, but doing very short running intervals interspersed with a long break can get your aerobic exercise down to a matter of a couple of minutes a week, 4 or 5 minutes every 5 days, and you will still get a really, really good response. Again, the caveat is you have to run quite hard or ride quite hard or swim quite hard. And the research has been done on all of them, and it's not particularly comfortable. And if you ride or run or swim a little bit hard, then you get exponentially less benefits. So if it really is a problem, I would have a chat to your exercise scientist or have a chat to your EP and say, well, I've got this limited box of time. What's the most efficient way that I can get the most out of it? So I've probably taken too much time and answer that question for you, Will. So I'm going to turn my video off and turn my mic off as well and leave the experts to it.
Well, that was very abrupt. We do like Tim's voice here. So as I was saying, that's right. I was trying to lead into common mistakes. So that's what, we're talking about people feeling good as they're moving, which is great because your brain's, relearning the movement. And then the common mistake is, because of that feeling, which isn't a bad feeling to have, great feeling to have really, is that you go, right, I'm just going to increase these weights. I'm going to put them back to where I were. Obviously, slow weight progression is recommended. That's just sort of common sense there. So slowly build it up. If you say our goal was over 6 to 8 weeks, look to build up. You take all those factors that I told you before, my training history, intensity, all that, blah, blah, blah. Let's try to map out that plan and goal to see where you can build yourself back up to in terms of your weights. And as previously mentioned, the neuromuscular adaptations first, the physiological adaptations later. If you get too ahead of yourself, again, hopefully this is a bit of common sense here, is that you're going to go down a path of your increased risk of injuries. You might go down a path of another flare up, which is going to set you back another X amount of weeks, so even further back had you just gone a little bit slower with your more conservative weight progressions. You have tendinopathies that sort of flare up again, and you're back in Tim's office. So you're trying to avoid Tim at all costs. So by doing that is you make those weight reductions and slowly and conservatively build back up, set the goal with yourself and us to help you get there. And as I said before, and I'll keep mentioning this, like the Kieser support team and network, in being me and us, all of us, we're a family. We want you to succeed. So seek help along the way, because we want to help you guys along the way. Okay. So a few common mistakes I was asked from a few clients that they wanted me to cover. On some of the machines. Now, it's a little bit difficult because I can't quite get out into the machines, but hopefully if we know sort of the codes to a way, A3, that's the one where you're sitting down and you're doing what we call hip abduction. So you bring your legs out. So you're working on your hip stabilizers back. A few common mistakes that I see there is that people will arch through their lower back. So the back will come off that backrest altogether. So obviously just make sure we're trying to brace your abs, keep your back nice and flat. And as you're performing the movement, where it is, yes, it is hip abduction. So you bring your legs out. Can't really see my legs here. But you also want to make sure you're pushing downwards slightly into the machine. So getting to what we call a bit of hip extension, because that is another roll of the glute, and then abduct. F2.1, that's everyone's beloved here at Malvern, specifically. They love working their abs here. Again, maybe the pole was alive with aesthetics. No, but it helps with your core strength and lower back strength and pain management there as well. With this one, a lot of people will hunch up with their shoulders. This is that ab crunch exercise. So making sure your shoulders are in contact with that shoulder pad, making sure your shoulders are away from your ears, they're not hunching up, and actually then the pull from your rectus abdominis coming forwards, okay? F3.1, I wanted to add this one in there because although normally you are quite firmly locked in, sometimes what happens is you haven't really put your hips further back enough into the machine. And then what happens there is that the roller pad, you're actually not extending as much as you think over it, and you start to, again, recruit your glutes to actually pick you up out of the seat. So you're getting less isolation in your lower back extensors, your multifidus, your rectus spinus. So those muscles there, you want to activate them. You don't want the glutes to help out just that. So make sure your hips are back and you get that leg restraint and you sort of tighten it to where you're comfortable with. C5, that's just another common one here. One of my favorite ones here, the one where you come in, that's a reverse sort of fly. So that's scapular retraction, a great postural exercise. For me, I can relate in this way where if you've seen us out before, we're on the iPad for 8 hours a day. I'm going to be looking forward. Combine the fact that I'm a millennial, so I'm on my phone even more. I'm in that same position. So looking at trying to open my chest back up, squeeze my shoulder blades, try to keep my shoulders relaxed, again, get them away from my ears, okay? And D6, similar thing here. Make sure you're not sort of rolling your shoulders. This is the chest press. Make sure you're not rolling your shoulders forwards off that backrest, keeping your posture nice and tall. Again, don't let the shoulders sort of elevate. But you'll have these mistakes when you first roll back in. You won't be surprised. But hopefully by reducing the weight, as I said, and sort of just seeking help, we'll be floating around. We'll help you sort of get back into swinging things. But those are sort of the common mistakes on a few Kieser machines. I'm sure there's plenty of questions you'll have. And the last thing I want to discuss here is the fact that life happens. All right. So a couple of truth bombs, I like to call it. You're going to miss a session here or there. You're going to have a bad week here and there, whether it be external stresses, COVID stress, financial stress, relationship stress, and you might miss a week. That is fine. That's okay. We're not superhuman. Like, you know, sometimes I'm a bad son because I forgot to go to dinner with mum and dad the other day, but I rebooked. So we're okay. We're back in the good books. But that's just life. Something will pop up and things will happen. So a few options when you do miss a session. You have a few choices here. You can throw everything out the window, put all that good work, and just go, yeah, whatever. Or you can just be realistic and say, I'll get back into that routine as soon as I can. It sounds so common sense, but there's a lot of competitive clients that I have. They go, I have to be here, have to do that. But if life happens, so be it. Because we know that from the research and everything that I've told you, if you've trained hard enough in the past, consistent enough in the past, that will be enough, hopefully, to defend your gains as much as you can in the long term and help you exercise for a longer period of time. And therefore, at the end of the day, exercise is a tool. Strength training is a tool here at Kieser to enable you to do whatever you like outside of Kieser. Go play golf, go snowboarding, do whatever it is that you enjoy. And that's fundamentally what we're here to help you with. So that's the life happens. Those are my 5 tips. I'm going to open it up to a Q&A. If you have any questions, these are my references, sorry. This is the Q&A screen. Any questions? Click them through.
Hopefully we do have a few questions coming through, Will. But just while they are, and hopefully a few people type away, if you've got anything that you want to ask Will, whether it be about training or specifically about machines or specifically about something that you want to achieve, feel free to type it. But on that last comment that you were saying, Will, about research showing that It's mostly about the cumulative number of sessions that you do. So if you miss one, it's not really a big impact if you're able to continue training. I looked at some data last night out of Europe, which hasn't been published yet, but it'll be a landmark study when it does. And it was showing the results or the strength gains of people by age as they've been training for not only 50 weeks and 100 weeks, so 1 year and 2 years, but it was looking right up to 300 weeks, which is 6 years. And even people in their 70s, after 6 years of training, was still able to increase their strength 1 to 2% per year. And that might seem like a really small thing, but if you remember that you're typically going to lose about 1% worth of strength per year, and you multiply that out over every year of that decade of your life, whether it be your 50s or your 60s, it really is age defying and age reversing. And that is represented in people's bone health and in their muscle health and their ability to consume insulin normally and produce insulin normally. So don't feel like just because you've missed one session, you're going to lose all of those results. Just acknowledge, as Will said, that that's life, that's going to happen, and focus on, well, how many sessions can I complete over the year? Don't worry too much about how many I missed this week. We've got a question here from Karen about G5. So specific Kieser machine related question. What are the common mistakes with the G5 machine, Will?
There's a few. So one of them is quite simply.
So for the people who don't quite remember all the codes, G5 is the neck extension exercise. So the one where you start with your chin tucked in and you end up pushing all the way back. I'll do the front version. Will do the side version. Perfect. You should know exactly which one it is now. So anyway, common mistakes, Will.
Other than looking too good on it, there's one where there'll be some handles here and there's a chest supported pad here. A lot of people can fall into the trap of almost actually extending through their lumbar. So they're actually not getting the extension through their cervical spine, which is what you're actually targeting, so your neck extensive. And they can end up actually pushing away from that pad. So an easy cue there is just keep contact with that pad. Use those handles to help you sort of pull you in. Hold that nice tall posture. Another thing is that sometimes people don't give themselves that chin tuck that Tim just said before. So they're not actually getting as much range as they possibly can. So you actually want to give yourself a bit of a double chin as much as you can, and then roll back through that extension there and going to where you feel comfortable or as sort of cued by your physician. Those are some common ones. Another one is just hunching up your shoulders. Another thing as well is, depending on the setting, is sometimes you always want to sit up and tall into it. You don't want to be slouched over it. Sit up and tall into it, and then get to that chin tuck. And automatically, by doing so, you'll feel tension at the back of your neck and your upper traps, which is what you want. You want that stretch when you're in that start position, and you slowly give yourself that chin tuck and go into neutral or slight further extension if you're up for it.
Yeah, just to comment on some of those common mistakes, Will, that I think you can group a lot of common mistakes on a lot of Kieser equipment to basically say that commonly people try and use muscles that they shouldn't be using. Yes. So the first time we teach people these exercises, we always say, this is the muscle group that you want to use. This is the start position and the end position. And we tell you that so that you know they're the muscles that you should be using. And by default, all of the other muscles you shouldn't. So when Will was saying a lot of people tend to lift their shoulders up, well, that's because they're trying to use their shoulder elevating muscles to do an exercise, which is cervical extension. Or when they're leaning back and forth, they're trying to use their lumbar extensors to do something that's designed to be cervical extension. So if you're uncertain, if you're having real difficulty, lower the weight down, then look at the picture on the machine. So, well, are these the muscles that I'm feeling it in? And is this the body part that I'm moving? Because if you're doing a neck exercise and your arms are moving, there's something going wrong. We've got a question from John who says, I've had minor surgery. I plan to return to training on the 4th of February. I ceased training on the 11th of January. So there's a 4-week break in there. How much weight should I reduce each machine by? So John, it's going to be a really tough one for Will to answer, because you might have had minor surgery on your index finger on your left hand, in which case the normal rules of dropping weights would apply for your legs. But just for the purpose of being academic and education, let's assume, Will, that it was a little bit of just abdominal surgery. It might have been like a scope or something like that. So not something that was musculoskeletal. It wasn't a scrape out of a knee or a shoulder or something, but it was still surgery, still had a general anesthetic. I don't know, John, but let's assume John might be saying his 60s. Sorry, John, if you're
a lot of unknowns here, but all right.
I'm just putting it right somewhere in the middle for you, Will, trying to give you a little bit more information. So if someone had had a bit of surgery, what do you think about a 4-week break and a weight decrease?
Again, like, I hate to sound like a broken record here, but just real conservative approach. Bring it right back, 40% back. And just just see how you feel when you do it. Book yourself in. But it depends where it is. But I mean, yeah, a bit of common sense from that point of view. That 40% drop, see how you actually react to the movement, and just listen to your body. And hopefully there's someone there to help you out. But that's what I'll just suggest there, and you slowly build up from there.
Yeah, definitely. If anyone's had any surgery of any sort, I would be letting a Kieser clinician know, whether that be an exercise scientist, EP, or physio, to see if there is a specific machine that maybe you shouldn't do for 6 weeks, because normal soft tissue healing times are 6 weeks. So there is sometimes machines where we say, okay, don't do that for 6 weeks. There might be some machines where you don't need to make it a 40% decrease. You might be able to do a 20 or a 30% decrease for a specific reason. So if you can have that session with one of our team and we can ask all of those questions, then we can be a little bit more specific.
Because then you can modify some of the sort of positions a little bit more to manipulate more comfortable positions. It's just, it's a bit tough to answer sort of specific questions over a webinar.
Yeah, it's because we don't know everybody's background. Will, have you ever dealt with anyone that's had arm pain when they're or pain kind of going into their shoulders when they're doing G5?
I personally haven't. So I might handball that straight back to you, Tim.
Yeah, I think there. Again, it's I definitely have, and probably as a physio, I treat people who are a little bit more acute. So I might be the first one putting them on an exercise, whereas hopefully I do a good job and I hand them over to Will, and Will sees them, a little bit later when they've got through that acute phase. So I think the most common reason that I've seen people get some pain outside of their neck on an exercise, and this probably applies to other exercises as well, is that their range of movement is too big. And so the first thing that I would do is I would reduce someone's range. So it's unlikely that they're getting discomfort throughout the whole range. It's probably when they get all the way forwards, or maybe when they get all the way backwards. And so I'd need to know their history, but probably the first change that I would make is I would take out that range of movement. So I'd go all the way forwards to neutral, or I would go, somewhere around neutral to all the way backwards. People often put it down to weight, and they think the magnitude of the weight is a problem. But in my experience, both when we're talking lower back and we're talking neck and we're talking most injuries, it's more often that I find that it's range of movement. Well, we've got time for one more question. And it's a bit of a clarification of the training principles. So I know you'll like this. I'm going to read it word for word so you can devour it. We're told that achieving 90 to 120 seconds before increasing the weight. If we get to 90, why should we keep going to get to 120 seconds? Are there any benefits of aiming for 120 seconds at all?
Good question. So as I was saying before, if 90 seconds is your minimum dosage and 120 seconds is your upper limit dosage, obviously you're going to get a little bit more gains by going for a little bit longer. And at the end of the day, putting 90 seconds isn't quite enough of a volume point of view to elicit those strength adaptations. So you at the 120 seconds is your upper limit. There is I guess not a void, but a level of difference there you will get. It's going beyond the 2 minutes. So if you shift your question saying, why go beyond 2 minutes, then it'll make a little bit more sense. And that's why we suggest increasing that weight. So but those are the brackets there for a reason. So if you're not obviously exceeding that time frame, to keep the weight the same between that. If you are exceeding that time frame, then increase the weight so you can fatigue between that time. So if you repose that question as 120 seconds, 90 seconds, then that would sort of make a bit more sense. But yeah.
And if you took it the other way, the complete other direction as well, Will, so, you know, if you only need to do 90 seconds, well, you know, why don't you just do 60 seconds? Why don't you just do 30 seconds? And we take it to a complete extreme. Why don't you just do 1 repetition? And part of the answer of that is that if to do 1 repetition and reach enough fatigue, you'd have to do it with a really, really heavy weight where your technique would be compromised right from the start. So that 90 to 120 second also coincides with a period of time where you can maintain your technique really, really well for most of it. And we know that technique becomes a really big challenge on the last repetition, but hopefully at around that 120 second mark, it's just for the last repetition. So Will, thank you. Thank you very much for all of the work that you put in tonight. Thank you everyone for attending, for asking all the questions. Hopefully we got through most of them. We will make sure that we send out a copy of this to everybody who attended and everyone who registered tomorrow. So if you want to look at it again, feel free to. And if you have any specific questions that weren't answered tonight or that you think of in the next day or two, feel free to reply to that email and that email will come through to Will and I. And one or both of us will answer that. And yeah, hopefully at Kieser, we can continue to provide you with really good and specific science and answers to all of these questions so that everyone can just be a little bit healthier in 2021. And we can do it time efficiently and safely, because they're 2 principles that are really important to us at Kieser. So thank you very much, Will. Thanks everyone for attending, and we'll let you know when our next webinar is coming.
Thanks, Tim. Thanks, guys.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Barbara, for your nice compliments as well. All right.